Sand in the early times?
No.
Or you close it up here.
All right, so here we are again, Thursday night here in Worcester, and we are having our renamed free educational events. This is because we're trying to expand the circle of people that we bring into these events. We're also expanding the circle of people we have as speakers. We're very lucky to have John LaRosa and Professor Maurice Cunningham who are going to be our speakers tonight. And as is our tradition, if I could have everyone up standing for the Pledge of Allegiance, and if I could have Fred lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Born and unborn.
Born and unborn.
Now,
I never heard that before.
I'm basically going to hand duties of being the MC off to our friend John Weston. You know, yeah, it's okay to applaud. And we're going to start with Professor Knoll.
Oh, thank you.
You are welcome.
Well, thank you. First, thanks for inviting me out, and thanks for being so patient. I apologize for my bad commuting skills. Most of the time I spent in about 5 miles of Boston on the pike. So that's the way it goes, but it's very nice of Matt to invite me out here. I appreciate the opportunity. So, you know, we're a few days away from the Iowa caucus. I guess that's the thing to talk about. I'll talk about it from a little different perspective than what we get through the media, which is all poll focused. Sort of the big theory in political science in the last few years is the theory of a book called The Party Decides, which makes the argument, which is very contentious this year because maybe the party isn't going to decide. That's why I think the talk will be a little more interesting than it might otherwise be. The idea of the party decides is that the party decides who the presidential nominee would be. During the invisible primary, which we're ending now, this happens through a series of endorsements by which the party decides, the various aspects of the party decide who's acceptable to them. Party members looking for two things. And parties, in this theory, parties are not just the elected officials and the party officials, not just Chairman Priebus and Mitch McConnell and the elected officials, Speaker Ryan and all the rest of them, but the folks who make up those constituents of the party or the coalition of the party who are regularly involved, whether that be religious groups, labor groups, interest groups, environmentalists, business groups, whatever it is. Through this invisible primary, groups, and most groups they want to see two things. They want to see somebody I can trust who is going to advance the issues I care about, and that person can be elected. And through this invisible primary, they sort of eventually agree, the party decides, and it's signaled by endorsements as to who's broadly acceptable to the party. And that ain't happened yet. That is not the way the invisible primary has gone. But the big thing to look at is endorsements, and so you do see some of that. Certainly on the Democratic side, even though the race is very close in Iowa between Sanders and Clinton, and the race is very close in New Hampshire, and we'll see what happens after that. The endorsement battle has really been won by Clinton. So if the theory holds up, Clinton should take the nomination, okay? And I think that probably will be the case. Sanders is acceptable to quite a few people in the Democratic Party. Progressives maybe, but they're one party. So I don't think that. But on the Republican side, that hasn't happened so much. So we'll go through some of the other things to talk about. Well, the media mostly focuses on polls and themselves and money. Polls, are not a great predictor of who the eventual nominee is going to be. It hasn't proven to be. Now, polls are now fairly useful in the next few days for who's going to do well in Iowa and New Hampshire. But overall, who the nominee is going to be, endorsements are much better. But, the media is fascinated with polls. Why are they fascinated with polls? It gives them something to talk about. I mean, and why are there so many polls? Because the media keeps running them and focusing on them. I mean, Jeb Bush, whatever way you like him or don't like him, he had something interesting to say about a week ago, which was, we can't have a debate on the foreign policy that we should be adopting as a Republican Party, because every day it's a poll, and it's about Trump. And Trump's a wonderful guy to cover. He's great media, and so why wouldn't you cover him? But polls mostly cover who's ahead. They don't do a very good job of telling you about other candidates and so forth. And so the media mostly covers who's ahead. So polls are not a great predictor of who the eventual nominee is going to be. The media is largely kind of following that thing. Media bias, maybe with something like talk about media bias. My take on the media is they're businesses that are biased toward making money. Trump sells. Polls are great. Polls. Why do they put on polls? People like to read about polls. People do not want to read, a 3-page or whatever page number issue paper. So we kind of like the horse race, and that's why we get a lot of horse race. And then there's money, which is the other factor that's paid attention to. But any candidate who's going to be a front runner or eventually get the nomination is going to be able to raise a lot of money, including a lot of candidates who don't. Like, some people remember John Connolly. I think when he ran, he spent $7 million, I think, which was an astronomical sum of money at that time, and he got one delegate, or Phil Graham, or other candidates. So there's a lot of money. I mean, Bernie Sanders has a lot of money. As I said, I don't think he's going to get the nomination. But, so these are the things that are going on. But, at least on the Republican side, as I said, on the Democratic side, I think Sanders will go away, and the theory of the party decides will be upheld, and so forth. But so far, it's not looking like it will on the Republican side. Now, it may, because the idea of the party decides is that the party decides the nomination. But what has happened over the past, and I'll throw in some other research here, is candidates that are largely not acceptable to the party, and that would include Trump and Cruz on the Republican side. Trump, one thing the party decides is a broad database of endorsers over 20 years and so forth. We don't have anything like that yet this year, but 538 has an endorsement primary tracker, and they track congressmen, senators, and governors. And Trump has nobody's endorsement, not a congressman, not a senator, not a governor. It's weird. Cruz has 17 congressmen, no senators, no governors. The governors are a really important endorsement, because what do you get with endorsements? Other than a high with them, governors can they can help with fundraising, they have organizations, they have stature in the party. There's a lot of good, cool things. Senators and reps, maybe less so, but governors are very important. I haven't looked at the governors recently, but I think it was like a few weeks ago, there were 31 Republican governors in the nation. I think 2 of them had endorsed, not counting Kasich and Christie. So what that tells you in some sense is that the party, and I don't like to use the word establishment because there are plenty of establishment figures. I mean, I would say she would reject it probably, but Sarah Palin is an establishment figure. She's an important figure in the party, in signaling to parts of the party, right? But you look at these elected officials and they're really low. So in other words, they're unacceptable. Who's the leading? This 538 tracker is kind of an interesting thing to look at. The leading Republican on the 538 tracker, who has the most points, 1 point for a congressman, 5 points for a senator, 10 points for a governor. The person with the most points is the person who everybody is saying is doing terrible, Jeb Bush. Right? And then I think Rubio was after him and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, even Jeb Bush doesn't have many points. I mean, he doesn't have a lot of endorsements. Nobody has a lot of endorsements. So the party hasn't, in that sense, decided, right? Nate Silva had a good piece at 538 yesterday. He said, well, if this happens, if we get a Trump or a Cruz, what does it mean? It could mean that the party decides theory is all wrong, right? Or it could mean that the party is very weak. Because parties have traditionally, even in times when they can't entirely agree on who the candidate should be or can't get that person, they can always do one thing, and that's kill somebody they don't want. And yet this year, I mean, there's kind of almost a battle going on between some of these, the National Review and other figures as to who would be worse for the party, Trump or Cruz. I mean, that's sort of the thing that goes on. But at least it signals that the broad swaths of the party, both of those figures are unacceptable. Now, they haven't figured out on somebody who is acceptable yet. And so on we go. As for Iowa, the thing that I do think is somewhat impressive there, I don't know what will happen with, of course, Trump missing tonight's debate. endorsements help in individual states as well. Iowa, they help quite a bit, a little bit less so in New Hampshire. And Cruz has some terrific endorsements in Iowa. Steve Deese, very important radio talk show host. Bob Vanderplaat's very important evangelical leader. Steve King, very important congressman, particularly on immigration issues. And so Cruz has that. He has, he has pastors endorsed him in all 99 counties in Iowa, which I think is impressive. And so it's a very interesting fight there. He does have endorsements. So that's sort of it. It's kind of, in some ways, there's probably not enough of this, but in some ways it goes to a theme I wrote about a little while ago called, what do I call it? Public people to elites dropped in, I called it, I think. And it was, I think it was after we, what was it, Mayor Walsh called it, the 10 people on Twitter who killed the Olympics, Well, now there were 9 others, So it's the 10 people on Twitter he complained about who killed the Olympics, which kind of a populist rejection of the idea that elites wanted. And there's been some of that going on. I mean, in 2014, for example, here in Massachusetts, we rejected we reversed a gas tax, right? Which proved to be unpopular. But in 4 red states, they voted to increase the minimum wage, which I thought was fascinating, because I think people, if they understand the issue, they'll oftentimes reject what elites are telling them are the best thing for them. People don't want higher taxes, but they would like a little more money in their paycheck. And so it wasn't all as seemingly inconsistent as it was. That's playing out on a national level right now in both parties. There are, there are elites telling people what they should be thinking. The elites and the public is saying, in some sense, no, we're not buying what they're selling right now. Okay, and so I think that's the thing that will play out in the most interesting fashion. And I'll probably be all wrong about this, and Bernie Sanders will be facing off against Donald Trump in November, which will certainly be an interesting event. Anyway, with that, I'll gladly take any questions. Yes, sir.
Ronald Reagan was a Democrat before he became a Republican.
Yeah.
Donald Trump was a Democrat. He was in bed with the Clintons. Now he's claimed to be a Republican. There's a conspiracy theory out there that this is all a joke to him, and that if elected, he's going to be exactly what the Clintons and Barack Obama were.
No.
Well, that one was answered. I don't know about that. I think clearly one of the things, as I said, the party decides theory is that you need to be acceptable broadly within the party, and for some of the reasons you mentioned, he's suspect because he isn't a consistent lifelong advocate of Republican positions, and so I think for some people he's suspect for that, and others. So far he's been a little bit of Teflon on this issue because other candidates have pointed out that he's not a real Republican or made the argument and really hasn't seemed to harm him yet. Anyway, yes.
There's talk about or threats of a brokered convention on the Republican side.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
Probably pretty unlikely. I think if he gets excited, if there's the quadrennial excitement, then maybe we'll finally see a brokered convention. What was the one? Kennedy Carter got close. Reagan Ford. It's pretty unlikely, I think. But again, it's been a very unpredictable.
So
year.
if Trump does well in the caucuses and the primaries, do you think the party just wants to go along? Even Cruz they don't like.
Cruz they don't like either.
So there's the two front runners are both people that the establishment doesn't like.
Yeah.
And I keep hearing rumors of a brokered convention, and it's going to get ugly.
I don't know. I think one way or another, the early primaries and caucuses tend to winnow out people. It's called a winnowing process. So some of the figures that are in the race now probably have to get out. Although it's more viable now to stay in because money is coming in from super PACs that will be helpful. Somewhere along the way, does either Trump or Cruz get winnowed? So there's only one of them to focus on. And then the question is, does the party eventually coalesce and decide on Rubio, Christie, Kasich, or Bushman? You know, which would probably be what return the establishment candidates. All of whom right now, I guess it was a summer poll up today, I don't know if we polled very carefully, but those guys are all like within 3 or 4 points of each other, around 12 to 8 points, and Cruz is in there too, New Hampshire. So, you know, some of those people have to start going away, you know, a Kasich actually Kasich has done well lately. I don't know who it would be, but, you know, some of them are not going to survive much past Nevada or South Carolina, and the further you go on, you winnow it down to maybe getting one of them to take on a Trump or a Cruz, or maybe Cruz and Trump are both strong enough to stay in, and a Rubio with Kasich, Christie, Jeb, one of them survives and is able to take advantage of it. It's been a very unpredictable year. I don't know what will happen. I have my doubts about a broken convention, but it's an odd year. Yes, sir.
The Republicans haven't had any shortage of interesting candidates, but what's going on with the Democrats? Their bench seems empty. I mean, they don't, once this,
Yeah.
you're done with Hillary and Sanders, they're really a dead party. There's nobody there.
There you go, they're the party for the over 70s. Because Hillary's 60 and he's 73. 68. 68.
To answer his question, basically started with the Clinton administration. The wipeout of 1994 and then the blowout of 2014. A whole generation of Democratic candidates have been taken out and never been running anymore.
Yeah, they talk about Julian Castro as maybe a vice presidential candidate. I don't know, it's 4 years away. I mean, at one point nobody saw Barack Obama coming. But you're right, they really, and this is, it's accelerated during the Obama era, when, the Democrats obviously have held the presidency, but they've lost members of the House, they've lost members of the Senate, they've lost state legislators, they've lost governors. So it's been painful for the Democrats. They've lost a lot of positions. I don't know about a lot of the Democratic governors in the country, but they can be covered otherwise. But you're right, the bench has been down some.
Do you see any connection between the rejection of the establishment, both on the Republican side and also on the Democrat side, because Sanders is doing so well?
Yeah.
And between this rejection and the rise of the Tea Party, and you can throw Occupy in there too,
Sure.
the Democratic side.
Yeah, I think people on both sides are feeling they're getting screwed somehow. I think, bank bailout remains very unpopular. And I think both sides they can agree on something, they can agree on that, but the little guy is getting hosed. The economy is coming back, but wages are not much. A lot of pockets where people not doing particularly well. And there's a feeling that pick who you think is doing it to you, but the banks are screwing us, the government is screwing us, and there's a strong feeling about that. And the Sanders has taken advantage of that, certainly. He questioned how negative he'll go, but Hillary Clinton's taken a lot of dough to go talk to Goldman Sachs. $100,000 to go talk to them. They can get me cheaper, and I'll give them this talk.
I heard on the radio on the way in that she's not in Iowa, she's meeting with Wall Street.
Philadelphia. Yeah.
She's in Philadelphia, and then tomorrow she's going to New York to raise money from Wall Street.
Yeah, Bill was supposed to be meeting with the big pharma companies.
Yeah, so I think people look at that and they're ticked about it. Sure, they should be. Yes, sir, in the back.
You had mentioned a little while ago potential Democrat vice presidential candidate
Julian Castro from Texas.
I'm unfamiliar.
He's a former congressman. I think he's in the cabinet now. He may have,
That's his twin brother, the congressman. He was a former mayor of San Antonio.
former mayor of San Antonio, yeah. And sort of considered a rising figure in the party. So he's somebody, but who knows? I don't know. Who the vice
But
president.
he does have one drawback that the Hispanics don't like about him. He can't speak Spanish.
He can't speak Spanish. Who do we get to speak Spanish for?
He's constantly attacked because of that.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's
I picture people just assimilate.
That's fine. Yeah. He can't speak Spanish. That's good. Okay. Yes, sir.
Back in '07 or '08, Donald Trump, there's a video of him talking about, he was asked if he would run as a Democrat for president, and he said he would have Oprah as his running mate. And at the same time, he was asked, well, would you ever consider running as a Republican? And he goes, yes, because he says all Republicans are stupid voters.
And be stupid enough to elect
That's not true. That turns out that's a made up, that's a Facebook made up thing.
Okay.
All right, we have some questions that were submitted through the website for some people who may or may not be here. And if I can get John to read them for us?
Yeah, by the way, for those of you who don't know Dr. Cunningham, he's an associate professor of political science at UMass in Boston.
Yes.
Right. You've got, let's see, American national politics, Massachusetts politics, American political thought of Abraham Lincoln. So you've been around a while, and you've been around. I just wanted people to know that, you know, he has some credentials here. One thing that I do want to mention about some of the questions. This is the attack ads that are going on. I you know, personally, I don't care about between Bernie and Hillary, but that are flying back and forth on the R side. Something that Chuck and I know, and Matt and I know from our work, is that you really need to see the 5 minutes before to the 5 minutes after. It's real easy to find that little sound bite and clip it. I mean, as an example, you take the comment that Trump made about that he likes the Canadian form of, you know, medical insurance. And he went on to say, if you listen to the rest of it, it really works well in Canada, but it would never work here.
Right.
So there's a lot of things like that that I think that before you jump, and I'm not like a huge Trump guy. I mean, I'm still out out in the ocean somewhere on a lot of these people, but you really need to, you know, just don't take these attack ads at face value. And this is something that is so scary, and it's something that the media constantly does. And it's just something that, if we're going to rise above all this, we really need to delve into it and research it. And that's what I'm asking all of you to do. But let me get to a couple questions we have here. Let's see. With an estimate of 12 million and counting illegal immigrants in this country, and with the dismissal of employment levels for, let's see, college graduates, low-skilled Americans, and others, the healthcare costs are spiraling out of control. Poverty and deprivation along with our own citizens, how do you feel we would be able to sustain the number of immigrants flowing into this country at the present time?
Well, kind of two separate questions. Is the 11 or 12 million that are here and those flowing in. There isn't a flow, really. The southern border is probably pretty stagnant in the last couple of years, from what I understand. And this, you know, immigration policy isn't my expertise, nor is economics. I think the interesting question embedded in there is the one about jobs, which I think is one of the concerns that people really have. That I think the Republican side has done a much better job of speaking to working class Americans, blue collar Americans, about the fear or the experience of losing jobs to immigrants. So but again, I'm no expert on this kind of thing, so I don't know that, but I'd be curious myself to learn a little bit more about it. So I don't think there's any great inflow of immigrants right now beyond the ordinary. We've seen surges. As John McCain said a few years ago, we don't have 11 million pairs of handcuffs. So I think somewhere along the way that will have to be resolved legislatively. Obviously, a few years ago, although Senator Rubio, I think, would like to forget this, the Senate did pass a bill, sent it to the House, and it died in the House. I don't see how the issue gets resolved, frankly. The Democrats are intransigent on it, the Republicans are intransigent on it. If it can get out of the Senate, it can't get out of the House, and so forth. So it's something that I think we're productive at some point for both parties to finally reach some agreement and some resolution on, because a lot of the politics is just kind of stuck on it. But it's a very, very difficult issue. It's proven nearly impossible to solve so far. I mean, George W. Bush was trying to solve it. John McCain tried to solve it. I mean, you have these odd coalitions of figures like McCain and the late Senator Ted Kennedy on this issue, and George W. Bush on the issue, and it just hasn't been solved. But at some point, I hope we solve it. It's been years now. Yeah.
A while back, I actually read the same article that this person who submitted this question did, and kind of got a few chuckles out of it. You started out by saying that pollsters love you. You're an old white male that has a landline, and you're home a lot.
Yeah.
Which is why we all should become college professors.
There we go. And that you're proud to represent America.
Yes.
Okay. And then you also said pollsters hate you.
Yeah, they do.
Let's see, stay along the line to figure out who they're really working for. And then I'm going to change this question a little bit. One thing I found very intriguing is you said sometimes I answer honestly, sometimes I don't.
Yeah.
So we go on from there. But the base question here is, why are we so focused on polls? And considering how poorly pollsters have been performing in the past, why don't we refuse to answer polls? And why do they serve any purpose?
Well, we do refuse to answer polls. One of the reasons they're stuck calling old white males like me is that nobody else will talk to them. Not so long, it was a while back ago, it's a few years now, you could call landlines and get an 80-90% response rate. People would respond. Now, young people don't have landlines, and so you wind up calling people who do, which people with landlines are predominantly older. And I'm around on a Saturday. That call came in on a Saturday. I got another one last night. And I've had, last election year I had, I think, 3 in 2 days polls. So there's something to it that's odd. So we used to do it. For those of there's technicality in the law. Most people, we all have cell phones practically. Young people predominantly have cell phones. A pollster can call your cell phone, but they have to have a person dial it. You have to have a real human being dial it. Whereas the calls we get at home are computer dialed. So the computer's just going bing, 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 until somebody answers pick up and put a person on it. You actually have to have a person, and it's very expensive to call cell phones. Thus, to get it done within a budget, you wind up calling me. Okay? And then I kind of, I'm sorry, Ma, I lied. I'm glad my mother was allowed.
Do you pretend to be like a Tea Party then?
That's good. I'm going to do that. No, I don't always. I try to obey all the commandments. So I try not to. But if they robocall me, then I just, and if it's a push poll, I do that. And you're right. I mean, unlike everybody else, nobody probably wants to get a call and be stuck on there for 10 minutes. You do something else. But I'm a political scientist, so I like to try and figure out who they're working for, and what the questions are. And so to that point, I'll kind of answer it. But then there's something that was written years ago about polls, which is most of the time we answer, we don't really know what we're talking about. And I agree with that. And often, and you may have gotten wind of this already, often I don't know what I'm talking about. So they'll ask me a question and I'll say, I don't know. And there can be a whole series of questions. I'll say, I don't really know enough about that to answer. I don't think I know enough. I'm not an expert. This one, I would have to get polled on charter schools. I said, I'm not an expert on charter schools. I don't know. If you would, if election day were tomorrow, how would you vote? I said, I don't know. Election day is 10 months away. I think I'll probably learn a lot more by then. So I can't tell you. So I'm not a good responder.
I usually make up a voice and hang up on let's see. Why does it seem that laws and policies are being made up off the cuff in Washington today, with total disregard to what the majority of Americans want and think?
That's nothing new, I don't think. There's a really terrific work by Marty Gillens, and now there's some good work by Marty Gillens and Benjamin Page. Gillens is he has a wonderful, he has this incredible data set of national polls going back to the 60s. So he can tell, because it gives you demographic data too, he can tell by income group what each income group policy preferences are. And then you can go into, of course, the congressional record and find out if they ever went anywhere. And the only group he found that Congress pays any attention to whatsoever is the top 10%. He's working on a way to get it breaking down into this 1%. If you're below that, if you're in the below 90%, then your policy preferences don't matter. Unless, they may, if you are, of course, if you have the same policy preferences in the lower 90 as they do in the top 10, this sometimes happens with foreign policy, for example, then you'll get your way. And in some cases, if you're part of a institutionalized organization, whether it be unions or an AARP or something, you will. But basically, if you're in the 90%, this goes back to the 60s, government is unresponsive to you. Slightly more responsive if it's a very closely divided nation. The president has been elected in a very close election, so for example, Democrats hate this. George W. Bush was more responsive to the wishes of the electorate in his first couple of years than most Democrats have been, for example. But overall, unfortunately, and sadly for democracy, it's true that they're not very responsive.
Can I just, it seems to me that there should be a straight line drawn from the fact that the 90% is ignored.
Yeah.
And they know they're ignored. And the elites are being trounced.
Brings in something else in political science that probably isn't thought of generally, which is, most people don't pay a lot of attention to politics, so most people don't know that it is. And so, as one of the arguments in the party decides, makes it, parties are free to bamboozle the voters because they don't follow it carefully. And that's surely the good part of it.
I mean, what Sarah Palin, we're mad because we've been had.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that certainly has resonance. Sure. I mean, if Bernie Sanders wants to turn to poetry, he could use it, and I think people would respond.
well, I mean, that is when I've spoken with people who have been on the far extreme, who've said, Barack Obama is a right-wing or a centrist president because he hasn't done X, Y, or Z items, because that was what we elected him to do, was X, Y, and Z, being a real, proto-socialist or progressive or liberal or however they described it, and they feel disappointed.
Yeah, Democrats don't think he's been some Democrats don't think he's been confrontational enough. Some Democrats think that the Department of Justice should have, indicted one Wall Street guy anyway, So, yeah, there's some disappointment there, sure. Do you have more questions, or how do you want me to handle this?
I actually have one. From that were sent in previously. There is a series of questions on immigration. I'm only going to ask you the first one here because you did say that that's not, something that is found on for you, whether you agree. But the lead question in this group of questions was that this is Article 1, Section 8 that this says Congress shall provide for the general welfare of the United States. So shouldn't it be the Congress decides whether to allow 1, immigrants, 2, refugees from countries, whether or not they have high numbers of terrorists? I mean, it should be up to the Congress, not to the President or the Senate.
Well, the President, for all the fame of his immigration orders, is pretty limited in what he can do. So, yeah, I mean, it's a congressional policy. The executive orders are kind of which are very contentious, and it seems to be winning some in the courts and losing some. They're in the thin interstices of policy of what you can do. So, yeah, I mean, it's a narrow area. I'm not sure it's very specific, and I'm not sure my answer is very good. But yeah, and to solve the issue of 11 million undocumented immigrants, it takes Congress. And Congress isn't about to do it.
If you really believe, or I should say, if one really believes that the electorate is doltish and uninformed, how can how can we maintain our democracy so it can be still be considered a valid political system? How can we survive a nation that seems to be being led by bamboozled voters?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the words to a John Prine song that go along, turn off your TV, throw away your paper.
Yeah, that saying that's, it's harder to convince someone that they've been fooled than it is to fool them.
Yeah, that's probably true. We psychologically we have a great attachment to our own ideas. The stronger, oftentimes the more wrong we are, the stronger we're attached to them. The reason I mentioned, if I could try and remember those Prime lyrics, at least the turn off your TV part, I think, is an important part of it. You know, when we get these arguments, and part of the debates, I think, are pretty. I'm a critic of them. But there's a wonderful point in I forget which of the Lincoln-Douglas debates when Lincoln thinks Douglas has been making false arguments against him and getting away with it. And Lincoln says, well, I trust that that the voters of Illinois are a learned and reading audience. And they can go back and read these debates because they're published in the paper, and they can see if I'm being false with them or not, because they can read and take apart these arguments and so forth. We just don't do that. I think that's a great weakness. I think it's a culture that was based on, even if it's a spoken word, it's based on a kind of literacy, is the implication of it. And here, you know, as John was just saying, you've got 30-second ads that take an out-of-context clip on something you had. We have debates. I mean, one of the debates tonight, and people will hear them ask. I mean, I think some of the, whatever you think of the moderators, so maybe some are better than others. Some of them, there are some pretty good questions asked that I think are of importance to people, and what you get is then a little speech out of the candidate, whatever message he wants to get, and not have to answer that question, particularly if it's a question that may not reflect well. So I'm a kind of a critic of that, and I wish people would, you know, read more and pay closer attention to it, because, you know, a great political scientist named B.O.P. once said, people are not fools, and they're not. But we could do our job as citizens better in these cases.
I wondered if the 10% are, the highest 10% are controlling things, or the party controls things, and and I think that was your word, was doltish, if the voters are doltish. Would we be better off to just, instead of going through all this charade, just pick people at random like jury duty?
I like jury duty. I'm a big fan of jury duty. I had my jury duty last year, and I really wrote very glowingly of it on the blog. Because it's a part where all citizens have to come together briefly. I got chosen for a jury, and we had to, we deliberated. Interestingly enough, one of the other jurors, out of the 6 people that were on my jury, one of them was Jeff Simone. I don't know, do you know Jeff? Yeah. So, who ran for Congress in the Republican primary a couple years ago. Is a really good guy. We agreed that the defendant was guilty in that case, so we can't agree. But yeah, I think, you know, one of the things about the 10%, you know, is that who do you go, if you're a politician, who do you go to for contributions? You go to people with money. Well, the top 10% have some money to give, and they do. And so, small wonder that the Congress people are more responsible.
I have a question. I understand what a nuclear scientist does and other kinds of scientists, but I'm having a hard time understanding what a political scientist does. What does that actually mean, and more importantly, how does that translate into what you put into the students' minds that, you know, turns their mush into something solid? What's the message that you like? What did you talk about today? Or, you know, I just want to get a sense of what is a political scientist?
Well, there are 4 subfields of political science. There's American trained political science. There's the study of international relations. There's the study of comparative politics, which is different forms of government. You know, the parliamentary system of Great Britain versus ours versus whatever system is in, you know, Nigeria and so forth. There's theory, political theory. So that's 4 of them. International, American.
And which is yours?
Mine is mostly American with a little tiny bit of, I'm not a real theorist, but I can teach American political thought, and I can teach Abraham Lincoln. And I like these things because, you know, it's said by some that there is no real original American political theory. But I like American and I like Lincoln because, you know, when the Federalists wrote and when Lincoln wrote and spoke, they were arguing from principle, but they were arguing as working politicians in the middle of a huge conflict. And so I find that fascinating. And Lincoln, you know, Lincoln in particular I find the most fascinating because of the moral conflict of the 1850s and because of the extraordinary grace with which he wrote. I mean, he's a beautiful writer. He's a literary genius. And he's a working politician in an incredibly complicated country and faces the greatest crisis in the history of the nation. And may tack a little this way and that way. It doesn't always get it right. Mostly he gets it right. It's, you know, he spoke a number of times about, you know, this country being about us, the survival of democracy being about for a vast future for all the world. You know, and we're living in this vast future, thank heavens. You know, it's a pretty damn good country.
So what are you trying to impart into the students' minds?
I'm trying to get them to think for themselves. I'm trying to introduce them to Lincoln and Douglas and Du Bois and Madison and Hamilton and John C. Calhoun and Reagan and FDR and the people who had a major impact on how we think of ourselves in this complicated country and the ability to analyze that and reach their own conclusions and spend their whole life doing it, I hope, thinking about it somewhere. All right, Jim?
That's great. It's a political science major at Holy Cross, right down the street.
Oh, it's a great place. Yeah, it's a great school.
So I don't make fun of anyone that takes political science, even though they mostly end up unemployable after they're done. Or they start their own businesses.
Some do, yeah. Political scientists do fine because you learn skills. You learn how to read and write, we hope.
Exactly. Now here's the gotcha question that the DNC cannot answer.
Yeah.
What's the difference between a Democrat and a socialist?
You know, this is kind of interesting. Somebody called me recently and said, you know, it was a reporter who said, you know, I'm working on this Bernie Sanders as a socialist angle, but Bernie Sanders isn't for the nationalization of industry. Is he really a socialist? And I said, you know, if you it's just, you know, there's a lot of I just drove out on a socialist road. You know, I was educated in a socialist school. Got my education at socialist high school, socialist college, and now I teach at a socialist university. They're all government supported. Where's the line? I don't think necessarily calling people socialists, other than Bernie, probably, who says I am a socialist, although he may not be, is especially productive. So I don't know.
So there's no difference.
I wouldn't say that. I think no. Socialists are there's clearly socialist philosophy.
The people on the right have been saying there is no difference between a modern liberal and a socialist. There is no difference, and that's why they can't explain that there's no difference.
I don't know. Well, I mean, I think the insurance companies are probably pretty happy with Obamacare, which gets called socialist. But if I was an insurance company exec, I was dancing in the streets.
There was a clip on the news yesterday of Hillary Clinton sounding just like Bernie Sanders about, you know, we have to take care of everyone. And the way we're going to do that is to take from those who have the most.
Yeah.
And although she's not as blatant in her words about it,
Yeah.
there is no difference between her and Bernie. There really isn't. If you saw that clip on the news yesterday, you'd say, yeah, she's just like Bernie Sanders. She's just a little bit more polished in her delivery of it.
I think he's pushed her to the left a little bit. I think she should thank her lucky stars that Elizabeth Warren decided not to get in the race, because I think she's a much better and more articulate and more, you know, better tribune for that argument than Bernie is. And she's having her hands full of Bernie. So, yeah,
Good. Barack Obama has been calling out, in particular, the Koch brothers
Yeah,
for all this time,
yeah.
and it's amazing. Koch brothers have doubled their wealth under Obama.
He's been pretty good, yeah.
And I don't know any Tea Party person who has ever gotten a penny from me.
Huh?
Not saying.
I've been all over the country and I don't know
Really?
a person in the Tea Party's ever gotten.
And,
One thing that I thought I would share about the whole socialistic thing is, about a month and a half ago, I was walking through a parking lot and a young lady, I don't know, mid to late 20s, almost ran over me driving a brand new $70,000, $80,000 Audi. And I noticed on the back it had 2 Bernie stickers. So when she got out of the car, she was very well dressed.
Yeah.
Obviously was making some money. So I just said to her, gee, I wish you would pay a little more attention. You came awful close to me, and she didn't even realize because she was on her cell phone and still on her cell phone. So I said to her, I noticed that you're voting, you seem to be a big fan of Bernie. And she said, oh yes, he's the answer for the country. I said, great, let me have your address, because I'm going to come over and use your car a day and a half a week. And she looked at me and she said, what? I said, well, he stands for socialism, and that's really what you're going towards, so why don't we just cut it down, and instead of you having to pay more out of your pocket, just let me borrow your car a day and a half a week. And she just looked at me like I was out of my tree. It's amazing how many people are following this path and not understanding what it is, or even, they don't even grasp on what road they're on. You know,
I know, you know, it's, as I said, you know, Canada has socialized medicine, but, you know, is there another industry in Canada that's socialized? I mean, there are different gradations. We have
Right.
public schools. It's socialized, you know.
Right.
I'm going to drive home on a socialized road. Hopefully there's not much traffic.
All right, one last
Hey,
question,
yeah,
but we
go ahead.
really, for time
Because
constraints,
we're going to let John have a fair chance. I was just letting you stop.
I had nothing.
Go ahead. Question. Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
When you say something like that, like, I like some of Bernie's ideas because there is like a drastic shift in, like, when he talks about economic inequality.
Yeah.
When he talks about like 65 people being at the very top that have just as much money as the bottom 3.5 billion people on the planet.
Yeah.
I think that's what he more gets at than, like, you know, if you make $100 grand a year, 20 grand a year, I don't think he's trying to put like me in your car and like
Yeah.
ship the money that way. I think it's more about like the almost gross inequality where people, like, not even the 1%, but like the 10% of that 1% that have more money than you could imagine. I think that's what he's more getting at. Like, he even called himself a Democratic socialist. Like,
But you know what, I don't think it matters what form of government it is. It can be socialistic, communistic. Doesn't really matter. There's always a top 10%. There's always 1% of the 10% that have all the money. That doesn't seem to matter.
Yeah, especially under communism. Communism had.
And it's exactly right. I don't know who said that, but it's worse than the communist and socialist thing.
but it's more about
Yeah,
like,
the Nordic countries are a lot more. They have better lifestyle. They have better quality of life. They're better in a lot of measures than
it's not
Western industrialized democracies.
It's not just about having nice
So
things.
it's not impossible, although those countries have become more unequal between the last decade, 2 decades.
Matt?
I'm sorry, but for technical reasons, we have to kind of end it here. I'd like everybody to give Professor Mo a big hand.